Hi everybody, and welcome to the 5th video in the Safe Passage series. And first, I just want to thank you very much for your interest in this project, for all your kind comments, the emojis, the shares with your friends. It's all very encouraging, and as long as the interest is high, I'm quite happy to do this and put one out every Thursday, and I hope you enjoy them. So when I was thinking about what to focus on this time, it occurred to me that the word hope is heard a lot in conversation in the media these days. You hear people say, I hope you're safe and taking care of yourself. I hope you're following all the restrictions, staying isolated. I hope you're getting everything you need. So we really are involved a lot with this concept of hope. And I started to think how best to define hope. And I remember many years ago attending a church service in Flesherton, Ontario, where the speaker was Lynn Hannon, a classmate from Flesherton District High School, and she was an excellent speaker. And one of her quotes was from Bruce MacLeod, who was a former moderator of the United Church. And he defined hope this way. He said that hope is to hear the melody of the future, and faith is to dance to it. Isn't that great? Hope is to hear the melody of the future, and faith is to dance to it. So applied to COVID-19, I think we could say that we hear the melody of hope in the heartbeat of all the frontline workers, all the medical staff, all the essential services that are working so tirelessly and putting themselves at risk for our benefit. And we dance to their rhythm by believing that we are going to flatten this curve, and by doing what we need to do to make sure their efforts are not in vain, and that we can someday resume a new normal that's maybe better than anything we've experienced yet. So we have to have hope, and we have to have faith in that. And I did write a poem about hope many years ago, and I'm glad that you like the stories that motivated the poetry, because it's fun to share those with you. So to take you on a journey with me for the inspiration for my poem about hope, I want you to picture that I'm living in an apartment in Rexdale, because I was working at that time as a teacher at Albion Heights Junior Middle School. And that Saturday of a weekend, I was very deeply involved in the art of procrastination, because it was report card weekend. And I should have been writing those report cards, but I have found that at every report card time, my dwelling place was never cleaner or more in order, because I would use that as a distraction. So that weekend, as I was cleaning and polishing and scrubbing, my mind actually was on two situations that both involved an essence of hope. And the one concerned a colleague in the school where I was teaching, who had become very mysteriously ill from a sickness that the doctors were having a hard time diagnosing. So all her family and her friends, we were very hopeful that they would get to the bottom of this problem and make her well again. And the other situation involved a wedding to which I had been invited a few weeks earlier. And I was asked if I would recite a passage from the Bible at this wedding. So it was kind of important that I get there. But a few months earlier, a very long-term relationship came to an end, amiably, I'm happy to say. But I no longer had an automatic +1 to these kinds of events. So I had accepted my RSVP with Sharon and guest, because, I live in an eternally optimistic state most of the time. And I thought, well, you never know. Somebody will turn up. So a couple weeks before that weekend, I did meet a gentleman, and we'd had a couple dates, and he seemed nice enough, and he had intimated that he might call that weekend. And I thought, well, I hope he does, because if he does, I think I'll just ask him if he'll come to the wedding with me. But I could not imagine initiating that conversation with somebody who really I didn't know very well, and there were all kinds of complications about attending the wedding. It was an out-of-town wedding, and just it was too complicated for me to feel comfortable doing that. So I fell asleep that night with these thoughts in my mind. And when I woke up in the morning, the first thing my eyes saw in a corner of the room, in a shaft of sunlight, was what I think could be called a very healthy dust bunny. And I was thinking, now where did that come from? I thought I had gotten rid of all of that stuff the day before. And while just thinking about that, an idea came to me that, hope is a little bit like dust. We try so hard sometimes to get rid of it, but in certain situations, we can cling to a sense of hope at a time that isn't very productive for us. And so these thoughts led to a poem called Dust on the Wing. With resistance, it clings to the mind and heart, in secret corners, hidden there. A presence that settles in delicate comfort on a soul stripped naked and bare, silently flirting with truth's attempts to sweep the cobwebs clean and tidy friendly clutter and straighten every seam and wash a sense of order into each crowded room until arms of reality finish the task of the relentless broom. On cue from the shadows, it lightly dances, silent crystals of cottony layers, gossamer dreams suspended in flight by a labyrinth of cares. Perhaps for a day it will dutifully hide in mock respect for truth's efforts to cope. Then softly the faithful nuisance returns, a creature known only as hope. So for me that weekend, hope was a faithful nuisance, because I was thinking about times when I had a false sense of hope and probably should have moved on much earlier than I did. Maybe some of you can relate to that. But until last week, I wouldn't have thought of it as just a false sense of hope. I probably would have called it false hope. But I read something, and I cannot credit it to the right person, because I just was kind of scrolling through and saw it, and I didn't notice who actually created it. But this person said that there is no such thing as false hope. There is just hope. And within the very fabric of hope, within the very idea of hope, is the realization that that which you hope for may not materialize. And never is that more keenly felt than when someone is told that he or she will die. And I think the reason that struck me so deeply was because I experienced that when my brother Don was dying of cancer in the hospital. We had taken him to the Toronto General Hospital for evaluation by a specialist who would take terminal cases. And we had been advised that it was too late for Don and that probably he had about a week left to live before his body completely shut down. But nobody had had that conversation with him. And I was waiting to accompany him in the ambulance back up to Markdale whenever the specialist came in. And I remember Donnie clutching at his hand and saying, just tell me how it is, Doc. What are my chances? Is it like 70, 30? Like what do you think are my chances to get better? And the doctor just kind of calmly picked up a chocolate from an open box on his nightstand and put it in his mouth, and he said, well, where there's life, there's hope. And he kind of patted my brother's arm and said, good luck, Don, and he turned and went out the door. And I remember thinking, that was really cowardly of you. You should have been straight with my brother because he wanted to know. But in years since, I have totally changed my mind about that. And I think that we should never take that element of hope away from someone as long as life exists. Because it might be the very thing that helps them to come to their own terms about a reality that they probably already know, but it will sustain them in those days. And I really think that there's also that element that miracles do happen. But I saw a really funny skit on the weekend with Brad Pitt, who was pronouncing that maybe miracles should not be your plan A. And certainly it wasn't the plan A with Dawn or with Doreen. There was all kinds of effort expended to try to prolong their lives, but no, the miracle didn't happen for either of them the way we would have liked. But I think on thinking about that, when we have faith in an afterlife, they may have gone on already to the greatest miracle of all, but it is very difficult for those who are left behind. So just also to catch you up on that wedding, in fact, that man did call, and he did escort me to the wedding. He was a really good sport, and it was a lovely event, but it wasn't long before we both realized that this would probably not be a really long liaison. And that brings me to another poem about hope. And this hope poem, I'm going to dedicate to my single friends. Those of us who ascribe to the philosophy in Desiderata. I mention Max Ehrmann's passage a lot because I think it's just such a brilliant piece of writing and such good advice. But he says, do not feign affection, neither be cynical about love. For in spite of all its aridity and disenchantment, it is as perennial as the grass. And in this spring season, when we are finally seeing grass, I'm reminded of a poem I wrote where the imagery is about fishing. So I thought, well, generally fishing season for trout starts at this time of year, and it's a very controversial issue this year, whether to fish or not to fish. But I'm going to share the poem with you because it was written with that imagery. And as I say, I think that I'd like to dedicate this to my single friends who will probably relate to it best. I'm fortunate to have lots of friends in every marital status, and there'll be poems for you in the future. But you should maybe be really happy that this poem really doesn't apply to you. It's called Tackling the Odds. There are plenty of fish in the sea, they say, and I guess I'd have to agree. For a number have willingly taken the hook and jumped in the boat with me. But perhaps I am just too selective, or seeking a species sublime, because one by one they were offered back to the lakes or the salty brine. And even the ones I fancied and caught with my best allure had the need to be free and swim away from me, so I'm familiar with catch and release. And now that my boat is aging and in need of some costly repairs, the waters are seriously depleted, and sightings of fish are quite rare. But I believe there's an endangered species still to be found in the deep, and if I'm quiet and wait with my finest bait, he'll hear in the song of the sea that a woman who's tired of fishing is calling on the fortunes of fate to guide this rarest of treasures to her harbor before it's too late. And together we'll sample the pleasures to be found in our mutual delight. Then I'll trade in my pole for the mate of my soul, the species that's called Mr. Right. And just recently I came across an encouraging passage by Alfred Lord Tennyson, who in 1850 was the poet laureate in Britain and was one of Britain's most famous poets, especially during the Victorian era. And he wrote in a poem called Locksley Hall these lines: "In the spring, a livelier iris changes on the burnished dove. In the spring, a young man's fancy lightly turns to thoughts of love." So this might just be the season for those who are hoping to make that great connection. And I think sometimes the universe just nudges us forward with certain signs to which we should pay attention. They might come in words to a poem, or just words that you read in the newspaper, or somebody that you meet quite unexpectedly, or in the words to a song. And last winter, when I was walking through an area that I really appreciate down in Panama City Beach, in the background was a loudspeaker that was playing the song by Michael Bublé, "I Just Haven't Met You Yet." And I thought, well, that's a good message, and I'll leave it out there for all you folks who are just waiting for Mr. Right or Mrs. Right. And I think that one time I read, God gave us memory so that we might have roses in December. That was written by James Barrie. God gave us memory so that we might have roses in December. And if I applied the same pattern to that way of thinking for hope, I think I would say that God gave us hope so that we might find light in even our darkest passages. So I hope you'll have a great week and that you'll come tuning in next week. And until then, thank you for listening.